So we'd like to welcome everybody to this Zoom discussion that's put on by the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign. I think hopefully everybody is familiar with our group, and we would be remiss if we don't note that this discussion is one day before May Day. So we'd like to offer May Day greetings on International Workers' Day. And in a way, it's appropriate to be having this discussion today because this question of the nature of the Russian regime and really the nature of fascism is extremely important for the world working class. It's not just a matter of splitting hairs or just mere semantics, because clarity in our language reflects clarity in our ideas and the faithful use of facts. And we see the disastrous state of the socialist left, much of which either overtly or covertly supports Putin, exactly by completely perverting that entire method. So it's also important when considering how Russia might change in the future. So with that, I'd like to welcome Ilya Budraitskis. Ilya is the author of this book, Dissident Among Dissidents. Ilya and his partner Anna fled Russia just a day or two after Russia invaded Ukraine. They did it like just overnight with just hardly more than the shirts on their backs. And Ilya is now a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley here in the Bay Area. So the format of the meeting, Ilya will speak for 30 to 40 minutes. And then after that, there'll be open discussion, questions, comments, and so on. So with that, Ilya, welcome, and please go ahead.
Hello, thank you everyone for attending this meeting, and thank you for John for organizing it. So the topic of today's lecture.
Ilya is frozen.
Today's talk. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
It sounds
would everybody
frozen
please,
now.
Would everybody please put yourself on mute? Please. Thank you. Go ahead, Ilya.
Okay, so I want to talk about one of the most important and most controversial discussions around today's Russia. Is it possible to talk about the transformation of the Russian state after the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine as the fascist turn, as the fascist transformation? And this question is so important, not only because of Russia, because of its past and future, but because, as I believe, this transformation of Russian regime also means a big challenge on the global scale, especially in the light of growing popularity of the far right, of various reactionary quasi-fascist movements in Western Europe, in US and Latin America, and so on. And I think that the transformation of the Russian regime in some kind of modern fascism, the fascism of 21st century, is is extremely important on the global scale in this in this slide. In fact, just after the beginning of the invasion, whereas accusations of Russia being fascist were produced, for example, US historian Timothy Snyder wrote a piece just 2 months after the start of the invasion. He wrote a piece, I think, for New York Times, where he explained that Russia became fascist. Also, Ukrainian President Zelensky called Russia a fascist regime a couple of times. So somehow it became not obvious, but it became a part of, let's say, broad discourse, broad discussion to use this term. But somehow using this term in this kind of public debates could also mislead us in the understanding what is fascism, like politically, theoretically, and so on. Because mostly the term fascism now used as the synonymous of pure evil. So to be a fascist, kind of to be a bad guy, to be a kind of absolute evil. Any possible moves against which is somehow justified. And in strange way, this kind of mirror the Putin's rhetorics, because the invasion of Ukraine was also designed as a kind of anti-fascist action, anti-fascist invasion, because Ukrainians are fascists according to Putin's propaganda, and so the Russians are anti-fascists. So basically, we see the huge devaluation of the very term fascism, and that's why it's so important to redefine the meaning of fascism to understand what we are talking about today, and to understand why we can say that there was some kind of fascist transformation of Russia after the beginning of the war. So in fact, if we look back to the vast literature about fascism written in the past decades, we can find like three main let's say lines of explanation of what is fascism. So of course I'm simplifying a bit, but that's the only way to present you this topic. So in fact, we can identify the first line as the fascism as ideology, and that is very kind of popular way of thinking about fascism, that there was some kind of set of ideas rooted in the reactionary conservative legacy of the 19th century, and these ideas basically are responsible for emergence of fascism in the mid 20th century. And this means that if you believe that fascism is a kind of ideology, you can identify what is fascism and what is not according to, let's say, some kind of ideological characteristics. Yeah, so if you have no some elements of this ideology, so it means that that is not fascism. The second approach is the idea that the fascism is at first as it is a movement. It is a movement of the, I don't know, petty bourgeoisie, is the movement of some reactionary forces against revolutionary forces, as it happened in European countries, in Italy, in Germany, in 20s and 30s. And somehow, according to this approach, the fascist regimes that were established after these movements came to power just transformed the old state into the form of these movements that came from below. And the third approach is based on the idea that at first we should analyze fascism as the political regime. So we can identify what is fascism and what is not only in the moment when this fascism is in power, where it exists as a sort of political power, as a sort of social power. And I believe that this third way of understanding fascism is mostly is mostly correct, is mostly relevant. So even if we look to the history of, let's say, classical fascism, of course we can't deny that there were the fascist movements, there were mobilizations from below and so on, but their coming to power would be impossible without some kind of support and even consolidated support of the old elite of the state apparatus, of the, let's say, big capital, of the whole machinery of the bourgeois state that welcome this kind of fascist turn. And why they welcome this fascist turn, why this transformation was needed. It was needed not only in a sense to, defeat the coming proletarian revolution, not only in order to destroy the communist or socialist parties, but to melt the, let's say, the society, the working people into atoms, to atomize the society, to produce the the totally subordinated mass of people that could be used as the workers, as the soldiers, as basically as the labor force without any forms of the self-organization that could be confronted to the domination from the capital and from the state. So basically, that was the main aim of fascism. Totally, total kind of reconstruction of the society with destruction of any elements of the self-organization. In the forms of the unions, in the forms of political parties, or any other types of self-organization from below. And that's why I think that it quite, let's say, justified to talk about current Russian state as the regime which is which was transformed after the beginning of the war in the form of modern fascism. I call it modern fascism, or for example, there is a term post-fascism proposed by historian Enzo Traverso. But the main, let's say, difference from the classical fascism is that you don't need to have any movements from below for the installation of such a regime. And even if you look to various, let's say, post-fascist movements in Western Europe, even or in US, they are quite different from let's say fascist movements from the mid 20th century. I don't want to go too much into it, but it's important to say that we already live in, let's say, not just in Russia, but globally in the neoliberal society, where many forms of self-organization were already destroyed. Like unions were seriously, damaged and weakened during the past decades. There was a decline of the mass workers' parties. So basically, we have no such mass workers, mass labor movement as it was in the mid of 20th century, and as it was the target for the mass fascist movements. So the current, let's say, ruling classes, they don't need some kind of methods of civil war to destroy the mass labor movement. So the thing that is needed to transform the society in the direction of this absolute like obedience, absolute subordination, is this torn from the top, is this let's say decision of the ruling elite to break with democracy in any forms. And that exactly what happened in Russia just after the start of the war. Of course, we can say that before the February of last year, Russia was a sort of democracy. Of course, it was an authoritarian state. Of course, some elements of the rhetorics of the state apparatus, army, and so on, that made this war possible. They existed already. We can say that this war and the transformation of the regime, they came from nothing, but the change of the, let's say, the quality, the condition of the society was really striking. So John in the beginning said that we left Russia in the beginning of war. So exactly it happened after the first week when the war was started, and during just a week after war was started, all independent media that still existed in Russia, all elements of the freedom of speech that still remained before the war, all of them were cancelled. So it happened just during 1 week, let's say. And if we look back to this, 20 years of of Putin's regime, we can definitely see the how this transformation became possible. What was behind this transformation? So let's say that from the beginning, Putin's regime was about the rally around the flag. So don't forget that it started with the second war in Chechnya, which also was called a special anti-terrorist operation. And at that time, by the way, Putin was trying to present it as a part of American crusade against Islamic terrorism. So his explanation was that basically we have the common enemy with George W. Bush, and that is Islamic terrorism, also presented in Chechnya, and of course, all these 20 years were built around the neoliberal market transformation of the of the Russian society. In the very beginning of 2000s, some important laws were produced by Putin's regime, especially the laws which make possible the privatization of public sector, the privatization of land, and also the limitation of the rights of the labor unions. So it was already in some 2002, 2003. Of course, the limitation of the all possible democratic institutions were also a part of the development of Putin's regime during the past 20 years. But what is the most important about this, let's say, history of Putinism, that if the first decade of Putin's rule was mostly presented as the kind of technocratic, post-political rule, and it was based on the huge depolitization and the lack of the, let's say, democratic participation of the society. The second decade of his rule started in fact, in 2011, when he declared that he will run for the third term. It was from the very beginning confronted with the rise of the mass movement, so-called Bolotnaya protests. That started in the December of 2012, and were directed not just against the fraud on the parliamentary elections, but in fact against the whole new construction of the political regime, which was turning to the direction of the unlimited personal power. Because when Putin said that he wanted to come back, and according to the constitution, he had the right for 2 more terms. So it was already kind of quite clear that is a kind of personal dictatorship. This kind of second decade of his rule was designed not as the just technocratic government which provide the economic growth and prosperity, but it was designed as the voice of the silent majority, which is, of course, a rhetorical construction, borrowed, by the way, from the strategy of American conservatives. That, well, there is just a minority who are protesting, who are coming to the streets, who are talking about dictatorship and so on. And there is a silent majority of hardworking Christian Russians who believe in traditional values, who support Putin. And Putin is the voice of this silent Russian conservative majority. So from the very beginning of the second decade of Putin's rule, this regime was about the confrontation. This regime was about the criminalization of any opposition. Yes, so even at that time, it was openly declared by Putin that all the opposition is paid by the West, and it is not a kind of organic part of the Russian society. So some kind of traitors that should be expelled and punished. And in fact, during all this decade before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, you can see in Russia the growth of the two parallel tendencies. The first tendency was the rise of opposition in the various forms, in the forms of protests against the parliament, against the fraud in elections, protests against corruption, labor strikes, protests against the pension reform, some environmental protests, and so on. So basically, we saw a kind of growth of the self-organization of the Russian society in various ways. And in the same time, we saw this tendency of radicalization of the regime in a very anti-democratic and very repressive way. And we can even through this history, we can see how the Russian domestic politics and, let's say, foreign politics, how they were closely related to each other. So, for example, 2014, the annexation of Crimea, the involvement of the Russian troops in Donbass and in the east of Ukraine. All these actions of Russian government came exactly after the Maidan in Kiev. It was a direct reaction to Maidan. It was not about the NATO. It was not about some kind of Russian-speaking minority. It was about the fundamental right of the people to overthrow their own government by the street mobilization. Yeah, because what happened in Ukraine, it was exactly the same that Putin was trying to prevent to be happen in Russia. So for him, it was the direct picture of the possible future. Of course, because of the very close history of both countries, many Russians were very much interested in what is happening in Ukraine at that moment, and the aim of Putin's actions was to firstly to discredit this political revolution in Ukraine and use it as the way to criminalize any sort of activity, of opposition activity in Russia. So basically, after annexation of Crimea, any sort of strike, any sort of street protest could be labeled as the attempt to organize Maidan in Russia. And of course, the annexation of Crimea, which seriously affects the most of Russians, and which was designed in this kind of very imperialist, patriotic way. It helped Putin to strengthen this kind of patriotic majority, the passive patriotic majority of the Russian society, who totally supports him and his actions on the on the international scale. So if you look at the recent history of the Russian regime in this way, you can understand what was the domestic purpose of the invasion of Ukraine. Because for this regime, it's not just a question of its geopolitical strategy, of its influence in the post-Soviet space, but it's the existential question. It's a question of their control, of their power over their own, let's say, population, of their own rule in this country. And in current situation, you definitely can say that the start of the war in Ukraine marked the final victory of the state, of the ruling elite, of the capital over the society. Yeah. So for now, all the possible forms of the self-organization are totally crashed. So I mean, if you compare what is happening in Russia now with the memories of the various anti-fascist activists, fighters in the mid of the 20th century, you can find a lot of similarities. So no any public protest is possible anymore. You can be jailed for up to 10 years just for a comment in, I don't know, in the social media. There are hundreds of cases where neighbors report on their neighbors about that they said something wrong about so-called special military operation in Ukraine. So basically, we are in Russia already there. So we are under real fascist, under the real fascist rule, which is definitely not isolated from the global situation. And I want to end up my talk with the example of the recent interview by Nikolai Patrushev. He is the second person in the Russian state after Putin. He is the secretary of the Council Security Council. And in his like programmatic interview published just a few weeks ago, he said that well, you have the situation of growing tensions in Western Europe, where the liberal elites allow the migrants to establish their caliphates, which are alien to the roots of European cultures. You see growing tensions in US, where the liberal elites alienated from the majority of their own population. They are supporting such movements as BLM and LGBT. And that will definitely provoke conflict, which could end even with the crisis of the whole U.S. State. But of course, there are some healthy forces in all of this. In all of these countries that are ready to welcome a true multipolar world that Russia is fighting for. The multipolar world where there will be no rules. Each, let's say, civilization will follow its own way and secure its own culture, its own values. And so on. So basically, you see again and again the kind of very kind of solid proposition from the Russian regime to the far right, to the various reactionary movements in the Western world. So if you guys want to that your dreams will come true, you should support the Putin's Russia move against liberal values. Yeah, so that Russia is a kind of vanguard of this movement toward the fascist transformation in the Western countries as well. And in this sense, the Russian, let's say, modern fascism is not something archaic, is not coming from backward consciousness of Putin or his clique, but in fact it's very dangerous and very deep understanding of the tendencies in the Western or Latin American or whatever societies on a global scale. So here I will end, and I really will happy to hear your questions and comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ilya. So what we're going to do, we're going to have like series of questions and comments. Whoever wants to speak, you can use the raise hand function. Please limit yourself to 2 to 3 minutes. And then at a certain point, we'll have Ilya respond, and then we can have more questions and comments. And then at the end, Ilya will have some final words. So with that, Linda, unmute yourself, and then after that, we'll have Maya.
Hi, yeah, I'm Linda. I'm from Minneapolis in the United States. My perception of the situation in Russia is that we didn't really start looking towards fascism as a mass movement until like 2008. And excuse me, I'm sorry, I still have some kind of a frog in my throat. He didn't want to start a mass movement from below, obviously. So his the fascist groups in Russia are pretty much subservient to the state, but he's done a lot to support fascism in other countries, especially in the West. And at the same time, he's also supported certain leftist groups that are willing to parrot all of his foreign policy disinfo. We recently had some people indicted for being foreign agents without registration, and that means that they were basically part of this anti-globalization movement of Russia. They were nominally leftist. I don't think they're leftist. I think they're fascist. In fact, one group actually is fascist. It's just gone from being, it's split off from the other group that was nominally socialist. So we're starting to see this. We're starting to see the spasms of fascism in Russia right here in the United States, and in other countries as well. So I don't know. I think the war has actually done a lot to pull the development of fascism in two directions, not just in Russia, but in the West, especially the U.S. It's exposed a lot of stuff and has really made life very difficult for these leftist mouthpieces of Putin. But at the same time, it's also escalated the process by which I think Russia becomes a real fascist country according to every definition. Okay, I hope you could hear everything. I'm all done.
Okay, thank you. Just for a note before we go on, somebody said they don't see how to raise their hand. If you run your cursor over the screen, you'll see some apps down at the bottom. If you click on reactions, then you can click on raise hand. Okay, with that, Maya.
Yeah. So I'm Jewish. My family are Jews from the USSR who they are from Ukraine. So I feel personally connected to this, and they moved from Ukraine in the 90s. My parents in 1990, because that my dad he could see the coming economic crisis, and but I don't know how to phrase that question. That okay, how much do you think the current fascism in Russia, how much of it can be traced back to the USSR, because it was anti-Semitic, it did mass ethnic deportations, it persecuted native peoples, it called specific to Stalin, from Stalin onward, it called homosexuals the fascist and bourgeois, how do you say it, perversion, and they equated them to pedophiles. How much the current fascism in Russia can be traced to the USSR? Because, well, I've seen a podcast from the Right podcast. His latest episode talked about the Novorossiya bullshit stuff, garbage, and one of the Russian fascists said that he joined the fascist movement in the 80s in Russia. Okay, I know it's not connected, but well, unlike the image the USSR project, there was definitely Russian nationalism. It wasn't a 1984 style regime which vanquished all opposition. Even besides the government, there were fascist currents in the USSR. Putin is from the KGB, and I just today saw one of your past episodes. One of the people who got allowed to ask questions said that okay, I'm not gonna say. So okay, Putin and his clique of the KGB, the modern Russian equivalent of the KGB, is basically the thing in power in Russia. Sorry, I'm rambling. It's really important for me to expunge USSR worship from the anti-capitalist movement.
Thank you, Maya. So we have Ted, and then I think Jeff is having difficulty finding the raise hand function, so he'll speak after Ted. Go ahead, Ted. You have to unmute yourself, Ted.
I have.
Okay.
Let me unmute myself. Okay, thank you, Ilya. I thought that was an excellent presentation. And I think it is important that we are precise about how we use the word fascism, that it has been devalued. People like Putin and Trump call their opponents fascists. And I think I want to make a comment rather than ask questions, although I have many questions, but in a short time, I'll limit it to this comment. I think Russia today is quite different from Germany under the Nazis, Italy under the fascists, and Spain under the Phalangists, which are the classical trio of fascist countries. And the big difference is those three states came into being on the basis of mass reactionary petty bourgeois movements that you mentioned, Ilya, as point two. The Russian state, the working class had already been atomized. It was atomized by the Stalinist regime in Russia, beginning with the third period. Strikes by the working class have been outlawed continuously since 1927. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, that didn't change. In 1993, strikes were outlawed. So the working class has not been able to organize itself in Russia or in the post-Soviet states for the most part, because of this legacy of the Stalinist dictatorship. And Putin's regime, rather than being based on a mass movement, is based on what was the KGB, now divided but still existing. I think that makes it quite different. It doesn't really have a mass movement. It has a passive acceptance by a majority, but not a mass fascist movement in the streets, which the Nazis and the fascists in Italy had. And I think at this moment, they have failed to produce such a movement anywhere in the world, with the exception of India and Modi's Hindi nationalism. I mean, if you look at Marine Le Pen or Trump, they don't have it.
Please wind up your comments, Ted.
I am, John, thank you. I think this is a new situation in the world. And I think your presentation began to introduce it, but we need to look at this straight line of institutional continuity that Putin represents.
Thank you, Ted. Walter, and then we'll have Jeff Bard. So Walter, unmute yourself first.
Yeah, let me also try to put my video on. Don't quite know how to do that. Oh, here, okay.
Click on the camera down where it says
Thanks.
that little video. There you are.
Yeah. Okay, first of all, Ilya might remember me because 20 years ago, I traveled to Ukraine to meet with what was pretending to be an emerging left organization in that country. And Comrade Ilya from Russia was pretending to be someone named Igor. And that was part of the infamous scam organized by a group of Ukrainian leftists who were pretending to hold various left positions. And although we've never received an apology or an explanation for that fraud, I nevertheless do want to salute Comrade Budraitskis for the internationalist stand in defense of Ukraine that he's taken against Russian imperialism, that he and other Russian leftists have taken. and to extend solidarity to him and all other Russian and Ukrainian socialists who are taking great personal risks and bearing the brunt of campus slanders. On the topic at hand, I think I agree with Ted. I would have thought that the key characteristic of fascism is that it rests on non-official thug forces to victimize selected enemies. In Germany, it was Jews, Slavs, and Roma. In the US today, it would be people of color and immigrants. And they're using populist and even anti-capitalist rhetoric to seize state power and hold state power to solidify capitalist rule under circumstances when democratic processes aren't adequate to keep the masses down. That's the second approach that Ilya presented at the beginning. As to Russia today, I agree with Ilya's description that Putin's Russia has changed. It's become a totalitarian dictatorship, but I don't see what's gained by calling it fascist. So that's my question.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Walter. Jeff, do you want to speak?
Yeah. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So basically, I just want to confirm my take, which is that Ilya's take is more in line with my viewpoint and less in line with Ted and Walter's viewpoint. And that, as I put in the chat, my I think Ilya, like myself, tends to dismiss Alexander Dugin's claim of having a fourth political form, and that actually this is simply a modern version of classic fascism. So that's a rich topic, right? I mean, you know, you could write an encyclopedia of argumentation, pro and con, and total mad respect for the people who want to distinguish it. But I just want to hear from Ilya now. He's heard two people arguing against his proposition that Russia is presenting a new form of fascism. And the debate seems to hinge on mass movement. And I would make 2 points. One, I would say that fascism in power, the genesis is not that important. Whether or not there was a mass movement that installed an outright fascist, I don't see that as relevant. I mean, you could have an appointee who has pictures of Mussolini, Franco, and Hitler, and you know, Mein Kampf on his desk in the Oval Office, and nobody would say it's not fascist, even if it was an appointee. And so my first point is I don't see the relevance of splitting hairs. And the second point is it seems there is actually a movement in Russia for a fascist style authoritarianism. It may not be as widespread as it was in you know, the advent of the Third Reich, but you have the Night Wolves, you have these thugs who go around Russia attacking LGBT individuals. You have all sorts of racist clubs, soccer firms in Russia. So I would argue that there is, in fact, a mass movement in Russia. It may be more controlled than you saw in the classic mid-20th century. But I would argue there is certainly a mass movement in Russia. It's just not perhaps identical. So those are my points, and I'd like to hear from Ilya on this.
All right. Well, with that, maybe it's appropriate for us to take a little break in the comments from ourselves. And maybe Ilya, would you like to respond to any of the comments or questions that have been raised, keeping in mind that you'll have some final chance for some final words at the end of this meeting?
Thank you. Thank you all for the comments. They're all very useful and very helpful. I will try to reply to them, or maybe some of them, briefly. So first, about why Russia, Putin's Russia, are supporting some sectors of the left pro-Putinist left as well. I think that is the main difference, let's say, between Russia now and the Soviet Union some decades ago, because for Russia now is not pretending for any sort of the universal project, well, whatever it is. Yeah. So the only interest of Russia to destroy the current, let's say, US hegemony. And for this reason, it is possible to support any forces that, according to Russia logics, lead US or Western European countries to some kind of crisis, transformation, and so on. So that's why you can't imagine USSR supporting the Black Movement and the KKK in US at the same time. But for Putin's Russia, it's absolutely, well, it's absolutely fine. Yes, so then very important question about the legacy of the Soviet Union in the current Russian regime. I think that definitely there is this kind of legacy. There is a tradition of the state apparatus. There is a tradition in the repressive structures, in the former KGB, and so on. And this tradition, by the way, now is also actively integrated into the, let's say, official Putin's ideology, which admire Stalinism, which admire Stalinist repressions, which systematically destroyed, by the way, all the organizations like Memorial, who was trying to keep some memory about the victims of the Stalinist terror. But I think you can't say, of course, that current Russian regime has just one, let's say, one genealogy, has just one let's say, one beginning. Yeah. So I think that the transformation of the neoliberal market transformation of the Russian economy in the 90s is some other element of the current, let's say, ideology of the current situation in Russia. Don't forget that Putin himself, after his KGB experience, he had this experience with the mafia, the gangsters in St. Petersburg in the 90s, and so on. So I think we should judge the Soviet legacy as the part of the current, let's say, fascist synthesis in Russia. There was another important point about the mass movements, and that basically that there was the point by Ted about the atomization of the Soviet working class that already happened under Stalinism. So that's why Russian regime and Soviet regime never after confronted with some kind of self-organization, mass self-organization of the workers. I not agree with it, because in fact you can remember, for example, the huge strikes in the Perestroika times, like in 1989 and 1990, where the hundreds of thousands of miners in various regions of the Soviet Union, including Donbass, by the way, they were on strike, not just with the economic, but also with the political demands. And from that moment, the new tradition of the trade unions were established in Russia. And in fact, this tradition was destroyed only in 2000s, and during the Putin's rule, generally. So I think you can say that already we had no workers' movement and no any mass movements that confronted the regime. So that's why I think that transformation of the Russian regime into this kind of open dictatorship was a reaction of the rise of the various, let's say, social movements and labor movement as well. Then there was a comment by Walter. So Walter, so first of all, I want to say that what happened like 20 years ago with Ukrainian story, I think that it was the very big let's say, mistake of myself to be part of it. By the way, in that time, I made comment for the CWI, which was included in the statement of CWI about whole this situation. But anyway, I think that it was a serious mistake me to be a part of that, and I think that this whole story was damage for the left movement in Ukraine and Russia as well. So just coming to your question that if we have a kind of open dictatorship in Russia, if we have a sort of totalitarian control, why we should call it a fascism? So I think that is a very important question, because fascism for me, as I was trying to explain, is not only sort of ideology or sort of kind of mass movement, but it's a type of, let's say, social power. It's tied to it's type of the regime established from the top toward the society, towards the workers, towards the existence of any sort of the self-organization in the society. And this element of fascism was explained by many, writers, philosophers of the past from the various perspectives, like from, let's say, Hannah Arendt to Polanyi to Franz Neumann and many others, who believe that the aim of fascism is much deeper, much more serious, just as it was explained in this famous Comintern resolution, that this is a just reactionary movement of the bourgeoisie. So for all these thinkers from the various perspectives, the fascism was something much more deeper, and it was something related to the very nature of the, let's say, market capitalist society. It's a very brief question. I can develop it, but unfortunately, I have probably not time for it now, because I want to go to another important comment from, I think, two of the commenters about the nationalism in Russia, mass nationalist movements in Russia, Dugin, and so on. So it is interesting that some 10, 15 years ago, you had a real mass nationalist far-right movement, grassroots movement in Russia. So there were so-called Russian marches, for example, organized in Moscow with the tens of thousands of participants. There was the huge Nazi skinhead scene in the main Russian cities. There were thousands of attacks against migrants in Russia on the racist basis and so on. But it's important that all this movement, all this far-right movement established from below, it was destroyed mostly by Putin's regime. So many of these people, they were jailed. Many of these people were recruited to some state apparatus. For example, now one of the leading journalists from but anyway, one of the leading journalists and reporter like from the front line who is promoting this kind of Putinist narrative about so-called special military operation, who is one of these Z war correspondents. He was the prominent organizer of the Nazi subculture scene in Moscow like 10, 15 years ago. And you have now a lot of this kind of people recruited from, let's say, this scene into the state apparatus in the time when all far-right independent organizations were destroyed, banned like years and years ago. So I think that this kind of conflict is very. It even could be typical for even the classical fascism, because in various countries in 30s, 40s, there was kind of conflict in between the fascist movements from below and the semi-fascist regime from the top, like it was in Hungary, or it was in Romania, or partly it was in Spain, and so on. So this, as for Dugin, of course, the idea of the force political theory is the kind of development of the idea of the third political theory, because fascism calls itself the third political theory, political movement, which is against communism and capitalism in the same time. So basically, because fascism was somehow discredited, Dugin established this idea of the force political movement. But if you read Dugin carefully, which I did, he borrowed most of his ideas from the various Western thinkers. He is not very original thinker. He borrowed most of his ideas from the Western far right, from the Western openly fascist, writers. Then you can find a lot of evidences of this kind. And Samuel Huntington is not his main reference. So there are thinkers who are much more important for him. For example, Chilean writer Miguel Serrano, who is known to be a occultic Hitlerist, and who is for years, for decades, he was one of the key figures of the fascist movement in Chile, where he promoted the idea that Hitler was not killed, that he's still alive, and that Hitler will come again as a kind of messiah to liberate the world from the darkness of Jewish domination. Yes, so this guy Sirana is quoted many times in Dugin's writings, and he is a very important kind of source of reference. I also can name many others of this kind, but to say about Dugin, probably the last point. There are also quite widely distributed idea that Dugin is a kind of the most influential let's say, thinker in Russia, that Dugin is sort of Putin's brain. I don't think it is correct. So definitely there is no like direct contact between Putin and Dugin, and probably Dugin, most of his books, they are too complicated for Putin to read. He preferred much more kind of simplistic way of explanation. But I think that Dugin influenced the Russian elite, but in another way. So I think that the most...
Ilya, I'll just remind you, you'll have some time at the end, so maybe you can.
Okay. So
comment.
yeah, so I will skip this this part. Okay.
Okay, sorry for interrupting you. So I'd like to, first of all, thank Ilya, not just for this presentation, but also for the sacrifices that he's made, not just here, but also for having to flee his own country. And you know, there's huge qualitative differences between the situation in the United States and in Russia, but there's also certain similarities in that in Russia, as I understand it, you have capitalists that are hardly a capitalist class. They're just fragmented, you know, the individual oligarchs. And in the United States, you have the beginnings of what you could call the lumpenization of the capitalist class. And in Russia, you had extreme weakening of the working class, and you have the same here in the United States, not to the same extent. So you have these this extreme vacuum that existed in Russia and is really opening up here. Now, Ilya said that the start of the war in Ukraine marked a complete victory of capital over society. But I have the impression that in a way it was the reverse, in that it marked the complete victory of the state over the capitalist class, because it's my understanding that the oligarchs in the main didn't want the invasion of Ukraine. And so it seems to me also that what you have in Russia is more like an extremely repressive form of what you would call Bonapartism, which is individual totalitarian rule, but doesn't have a real mass active base like, for instance, Hitler had, and so on. But that raises the question, because what would happen if Putin's invasion succeeds? And is it not possible that under those circumstances, that you would have a far worse situation in Russia, not only with imprisonment, not only of thousands, but of millions, mass executions, pogroms of some sort or another? Then would not that be a truly fascist form of rule? So it seems to me that it's not only a question of the present, but how things could change in the future. So with that, I'll stop. And Cheryl, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So for me, there are three arenas where it really matters what our understanding of Russia is today and what it could become. I would say the first is what workers, well, I just talked about the United States because that's where I am and that's where we're doing this work, is workers in the United States. What do they think of Russia? What is their understanding of Russia? The second one is the left in this country. And I'll speak of just the campus left, but the left in general, what is the understanding of socialists and leftists in the United States or other places about Russia? And then the third place where it matters is what is Russia going to become depending on the outcome of the war. That's why this discussion is really important for me. So a couple of weeks ago, I gave a presentation, a very brief presentation on our union resolution supporting Ukraine and solidarity with Ukraine at my former union, at the place where I retired from. And the first thing I did was talked about what is Russia today and about the invasion. And I didn't say it was fascist, but I didn't need to. I described it as a police state, and I described the details about what people here take for granted that workers in Russia do not have, that their peers in Russia do not have, and how this is what's behind the invasion. So, but of course we know that, I mean, well, the resolution was not victorious, but there was a debate on it, which I was very happy about that. But wherever we get the chance to talk to just regular people who are not leftists about why Ukraine matters to them, it's because of the role of Russia in the world and the influence and how Russia is a beacon of authoritarianism around the world. So the second thing is, the second arena is in regards to the left. And we know what the campus left says about Ukraine. They say, well, Russia's very bad and they invaded, but you know, Nazi. We know what they say. But so I don't know how many people here have seen a very powerful film, it's Mr. Jones, and it's about a true story that happened during the 1930s, where under Stalin, there was a mass forced starvation of millions of Ukrainians. And the reason I mention this film is because it demonstrates how clearly there was a whole generation of leftists and socialists who felt it was, people who knew about the Holodomor, who decided that it was worth it for people to starve to death in order to promote this fantasy of a socialist future that was actually not going on in the Soviet Union at that time. But so in my mind, the reason this film is important and the way that it talks about the cover-up of this crime is the fact that today, the campus are saying it's worth it to condemn US imperialism and say that Russia, as a beacon of an alternative of some kind, the multipolar version of the world is better. It's good that US imperialism should be, I don't know, have an opposition. So there's a great deal of confusion and clarity that needs to occur amongst the left. So the last arena where it matters, and I hope Ilya will talk about this a little bit when he sums up, and I'm interested in what other people think too, is what are the prospects for the way things could go in terms of, depending on what the outcome of the war is, if Russia is, it's hard to, in any case, that's important. That to me, that's very important. And I know that's practically a whole other discussion, but I'm hoping that Ilya could talk about that a little bit, about the general direction of Russia down the road.
Thank you, Cheryl. Brad, you're next, please. Brad? Okay, well.
There we go.
Oh,
Hi, sorry about that. I'd like to also thank the presenter for their very reasonable and level-headed presentation. I would basically align with the point of view presented by Ted, but I'd like to add in some historical perspective, which is that classical fascism emerged in this very specific context after First World War, when the weakened imperialisms of Central Europe, namely Germany and Italy and others, perceived at their doorstep an immediate danger of Bolshevik revolution, of the Bolsheviks, as they call them, both as an international phenomenon who were going to spread world socialist revolution, starting with Germany and Italy. At the same time that they also faced, the bourgeoisies of these two states faced powerful, independent, and radicalized working class movements within their own countries. So fascism as such, beginning with Italy, was a mutation of traditional far-right politics, which date all the way back to the Napoleonic Wars through the 19th century, which were perfectly reactionary and racist and anti-worker and so forth, was a specific crystallization of those, a century of those forces in that particular situation to under a program whose number one platform was to smash the entire left. And as our presenter correctly pointed out, it is to uproot the whole cultural and social context that would give rise to any kind of oppositional left, and in particular, the working class movement. And that is why the Nazis later went after all sorts of academics and anybody who corresponded to Ron DeSantis's so-called sneaky cultural Marxist takeover of the United States, for example. So that was its number one purpose. Obviously, in today's world, though, I would say we don't, not only do we recognize, but also the capitalist classes of the world do not recognize such a threat on the world scale. There's no world socialist international threatening world revolution in their eyes, because it's true. Likewise, none of these countries face powerful, independent, militant and radicalized socialist working class movements threatening their power domestically. So I think what we're seeing here on the world scale, the reactionary movement that we're seeing on the world scale.
Fred, please wind up your comments.
Yeah, I know, but this is impossible to do so. Please give me a break.
Well, I'm sorry. Everybody,
let me I'm almost finished, so let me finish, because I get really irritated with these limits on deep subjects like this, and I'm trying to be brief, so you've already extended it. So to conclude, what we're seeing is an international movement of the far rights, not fascism, but of the whole far right internationally, in a preemptive strike against the possibility of the reemergence of such a international movement of workers. This is a preemptive strike. That explains Modi. That explains a lot of different phenomena around the world. Okay, as far as the far rights, why? And this is where I'm going to end, because all of the capitalist regimes, especially the leading imperialist ones since the end of World War II, those regimes have always rested on a compact with their own far rights. Okay, and that's the end of it.
Okay, Chris, you're next, please. And please, look, I'm not trying to harass anybody or anything like that, but you know, people have a limit as far as their attention span for a full meeting, and we don't all get to speak just as long as we want. So, Chris, go ahead, please.
I was going to ask Ilya what if he sees any hope of any progressive change in the near future, perhaps as a result of a defeat of Russia in Ukraine, or of the war dragging on for a long time, discontent rising. So Boris Kagalitsky said that when Russia is defeated in war, there tends to be a revolution, or at least reform. So just wondering if Ilya would comment on whether there is any prospect of, well, either a popular surge, or perhaps a coup, or some Putin being overthrown. Yeah, just any comments on that? Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Ian?
Hello. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, hey, I'm Ian. I'm from well, I'm from Ireland, but I'm in Berlin. And right. So in Germany, people on the left, including those who define themselves primarily as anti-fascists, one of the slogans they like is "Kein Frieden mit den Faschisten," so no peace with fascists. So from a political point of view, I think it is quite important to get more leftists here to understand that the Putin regime is a fascist regime. But yes, I'm interested to hear any views of how to convince them to do so beyond the arguments, because they seem to be not very. A lot of them seem to be not very movable. Yeah, so just want to throw these kind of thoughts into the room. By the way, an Irish anti-fascist socialist fighter died in Ukraine a few days ago. His name was Finbar Cafferty.
Is that it? Okay, thank you, Ian. Henry?
Okay, greetings from Toronto, Canada. Thank you to Ilya for your presentation. I found it interesting. And again, I'd like to express my solidarity with you and your comrades in Russia for your anti-war and anti-fascist struggle. When I was a young socialist, I came and a sympathizer of the American SWP, I came across a pamphlet called "What is Fascism? What is it, and How to Fight It?" And I found it very interesting, and I learned a lot from it, and I've sort of carried those ideas around with me ever since. For me, the question of what is fascism is closely connected with the question of how to fight it. When we're talking about the rise of Nazism in Germany, we were talking about mass socialist and communist parties that refused to work together to crush the fascists. They refused to combine their military organizations to crush the Nazis militarily, and they refused to form a common front or united front, electoral front, to defeat the Nazis at the polls. In Spain, we had a civil war in which the workers tried to defeat Franco militarily while fighting for a socialist revolution to create a truly democratic workers and farmers Spain, and they were defeated because of a number of reasons that, of course, I won't go into now. In Italy, it was the Second Imperialist War combined with the struggle of the Italian partisans that eventually defeated the fascists in Italy. So what we have now, I mean, in Russia, we have all popular movements, all opposition movements are driven underground. Leaders are in jail or in exile. Very difficult to organize any kind of opposition movement within Russia. Future of the Putin dictatorship, whether it's fascist or any other description of it, depends largely on military defeat in the fight against Ukraine. So the military defeat of Russia in the war with Ukraine is in the interest of democracy and freedom in Russia. And the defeat of Russia in the war with Ukraine is largely dependent on the Ukrainian war becoming a truly national liberation war, and not a war that is being hampered and partly helped, but partly hampered by the NATO powers that are arming the Ukrainians. So I'd like to hear some strategic way forward from Ilya. How are we going to move forward in Russia? That question has already been asked. I'd like to reinforce some ideas, reinforce the request for some strategic perspective in view of the situation right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Henry. So I don't see any other new hands raised. Before I ask Ilya to sum up, is there anybody that's already spoken that would like to add, speak like another minute or so, either to add to their remarks or bring up something new? If so, okay, we have Rick. I don't think he's spoken yet. If there's anybody else that would like to add to their remarks, please raise your hand. If not, then Rick, go ahead, please. Rick, you're on mute. Rick, you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself, Rick.
There we go. I'm curious that John mentioned, Ilya, that the oligarchs, many oligarchs in Russia, disapproved of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I'm curious to know, I'm curious about the nature of Russia's capitalist class as a whole. I don't know very much about Russia's capitalist class today. And I think that that would help to inform us greatly to come to be able to apply dialectical and historical materialism to the nature of Russian society.
Is that it, Rick?
That's it.
Okay. Is there anybody else, anybody that's already spoken that would like to add to their remarks? Okay, if not, then Ilya, why don't you go ahead and kind of give any concluding remarks or sum up, what's been discussed, reply to comments and so on.
Yes. So firstly, I probably will comment on this big question about the Russian capitalist class and its interests and its relation to the regime. I think that the very term oligarchs that is widely distributed in the Western media is not correct, because oligarchy means that some kind of economic power, financial power somehow transforms into political power. And that is exactly what not happened in Russia. If you look at the, let's say, start of the post-Soviet Russia, post-Soviet Russian economy, you can see that the whole division of the and the whole redistribution of the property of the industry built in the Soviet times into the private hands were all the time under the very strict control of the state. And in fact, you can say that from the very beginning, the guarantee rights for this property, the guarantee for this results of the Russian privatization came not from some kind of law, not from the rule of law, but it came from the loyalty to the state. So from the very beginning, all this, let's say, big owners, they have some relations with the state, and they were obliged for the state to control these sectors of the economy. So from the very beginning, the nature of the post-Soviet capitalist class was extremely dependent. And if in, let's say, 90s, under rule of Boris Yeltsin, when the state power was not fully concentrated in one hands, the any kind of independent political actions of these new owners could be possible. So in the very beginning of the Putin's rule, in the beginning of 2000s, after the arrest of Mikhail Khodorkovsky and rare distribution of his property, which was one of the biggest oil companies in the country for that time. This whole, let's say, capitalist class was fully politically expropriated. So you can't say that capitalist class in Russia ever exists in terms of, let's say, the agent of its own political interests. Yeah. So that is why from the beginning of the invasion, there was no, of course, any actions against this invasion coming from this capitalist class, because this capitalist class is also kind of atomized. It's also dependent, as let's say the other classes in the in the Russian society, of course, in a different way. But I think it's also important to mention that, okay, these people, they lost a lot of money because of sanctions. Yes, they lost a lot of foreign markets after the war, but they saved the main thing. They saved their property in Russia, because the only way to guarantee this property in their hands is to keep their loyalty to the state. So the relation between this capitalist class and its right for property is the political total political loyalty, total subordination with the state. But it's also raises another question: the question of the nature of the state, and that is very important. I don't want to go much into it, but I think that the state itself became an object of some kind of market neoliberal transformation. Because inside the state in Russia, there are also some groups of, let's say, not just political interests, but economic interests. And there is also a kind of market competition inside the state, or between different fractions of the state, which are related to some kind of private companies. And in fact, what you have now with this Wagner group during the war, I think it's very important. It's very important because it opened you an opportunity to understand how this Russian capitalism is organized. Yeah, because Wagner Group, it's a kind of classical military startup with the support of the state, with some kind of relation with the state, but which operate independently and which somehow trying to compete with the state structures in order to present itself as something more effective. It's more competable. So that is to the topic of the Russian capitalist class. Then about Russia as the police state. I think if you tell Americans that Russia is a police state, they could believe that it's something, I don't know, like some conservative state of US. And that is not correct. Russia is not like this. It's far more something else, because the question is not just the police have all the rights to arrest you. It's not the question that you could be I don't know, your public disagreement with the actions of the government. But the question is that any elements of the society has no any autonomy from the state. So I will give you like two examples. Can you imagine that tomorrow, in the UC Berkeley or some other American university, some kind of commissar from the state will come and said, okay, students, so now today we are marching together with the portraits of Donald Trump to the main square of our city and spend there like 3 hours listening to his speech. So all those who will be not participating in this event probably will be expelled from the university and will have some other problems, and maybe their families also will have some other problems. You can't imagine such a situation here. Yeah, because you have some kind of autonomy of the university, which is somehow rooted in the structure of American society, of American capitalism, or whatever. The second example is the courts. Yes, I totally agree that in US you have a non-equal representation of the courts that is very much about the class basis of the courts and so on, but you can't deny the right to defend yourself, and you can't deny the even formal kind of competitiveness of the sides of the trail. But in Russia, the court already transformed as the in a way in what the courts and the, I don't know, under the fascist regimes were operating. So there is no any right to the lawyer to be presented in the political trails, and even during last year, many independent lawyers, they left the country because they were under the danger of persecution. So they can't be presented. Yeah, and of course the whole course, they're absolutely not just competitive, but you can't even present your arguments, and your arguments, they're totally ignored from the beginning from the judge, because the position of the judge and prosecutor in Russia, they're totally the same. That is how the whole courts are operating in Russia. And even the final judgment, textually repeats the note from prosecutor. So it's kind of another level of, let's say, how the courts are operating, what are relations between the courts and the state. So just two more questions, more answers. Yeah. So why it's politically and practically important to discuss Putin's regime as the fascism, as a new sort of fascism? Because it also gives us opportunity to discuss the, let's say, final project of the current far-right movements, because one of the differences, the main differences between the let's say modern far-right and the classical fascism is that modern far-right has no any, let's say, project. It has no alternative exact alternative to a current order. They just want to, bring something back to just change something without proposing a kind of new fascist society. But somehow there is a project behind all these movements, and this project could be explained through the way how it exists in the countries where similar leaders, similar movements, similar ideas already are in power. Yeah, and exactly the examples of, let's say, Hungary as a light as a light version of this fascist, post-fascist or neo-fascist project, and Russia is a more hardcore version. It is something that could be discussed as the final project, is the final result of this possible victory of so-called traditional values that advocated by these various far-right movements. Then there was a question about the possibility of progressive changes in Russia if Russia will be defeated. I think that it definitely will provoke some kind of crisis of the current political regime. But the other question is what will be defeat of Russia? Yeah, because one of the important features of the current Russian official propaganda is the total kind of unclarity about the real goals of this war. So if you follow the Russian propaganda and inside Russia, yeah, the Russian propaganda for Russians, but also the Russian propaganda from abroad, you can hear in one time like 3 or 4 different goals of this war. So one is about the people of Donbass suffering because the Russian culture was cancelled. The second is NATO-Ukraine thing. The third is multipolar world and the liberal order. So there are many different versions in the same time. So that's why it's easy to present each of them as the goal that was finally reached because of the special military operation. For example, if the current front line will be frozen, it could be presented by Putin as his victory inside Russia. That you see, we broke this so-called international laws that we deny as the invented by Americans. Now we integrated the new territories. It is how it's called officially in Russia. We integrated the new territories into the Russian Federation. So that was the exact goal of the special military operation. We won. Yeah, so it is very possible, and if now already most of Russians, they are very tired of the war, they wanted it to be over in some way, they can buy this version without problems, and that could stabilize the regime. That's why if we talk about the military defeat, so it should be discuss what kind of military defeat we are discussing. Yeah, so probably I will skip here. Yeah, and there was just one more comment from John about the possible the possible acceleration of the repressions if some kind of real camps, concentration camps could be established in Russia, or if some groups of population will be prosecuted. I think that all it is possible because all it is already existed in the, let's say, in the language, in the official language. So they already talking about LGBT people as a kind of group that should be alienated somehow. All the laws that alienated LGBT from the society, from the healthy traditional Russian society, they are already implemented. The so-called laws against LGBT propaganda. Yeah, so you can say it as a kind of first step to the further discrimination and criminalization of LGBT people. So that could be one group, and another group could be internal traitors. Yeah, the enemies of the people, how it was called in the Stalin times. And you already have this kind of criminalization of any sort of dissent in the official language. So they already talking that we need to put these people in the in prison. So all of these people who have any support, I don't know, for Navalny or for any sort of opposition, they are agents of Ukraine, they are agents of the West, and so on. But there is another side of this story, is the let's say material infrastructural side of the story. If the current regime is ready to transform the whole, prison repressive system into this direction, because you need to invest a lot to the prison to to organize the space for thousands or hundreds of thousands of political prisoners. And for now it looks like that it's not ready. But of course everything is possible, because the tendency is quite clear. So probably here I will stop.
Well, thank you very much, Ilya. I think that is a good stopping point, but I see we have one person who's raised her hand who wants to speak. So I'm reluctant to just not call on Virginia. But so Virginia, please go
Just
ahead.
a very quick question.
Oh, okay.
Thanks very much. And just listening to your summing up, Ilya, thanks very much, by the way, for your talk. Is it in any way what you're saying is similar in descriptive form from what Ishenko has written recently about military Keynesianism? Do you think there's and he described that in terms of sections of society, the poorer sections being bribed with higher wages to take part in the military. Anyway, I don't want to take too much time. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So that was the question.
Okay, thanks. Thanks to you, Virginia. Ilya, do you want to comment on that? And then if you have just one or two final sentences to conclude the meeting.
About this point on military Keynesianism, I don't agree with it, because in fact, of course, we see the growing huge military budget in Russia. We see some exact groups, social groups, which gain from the war. Not just soldiers who are some of them well paid, but also workers in the military industry and so on. But Keynesianism also means some kind of change of the very logic of capitalism, in the way that that the state is ready to invest for some kind of reindustrialization, for a social benefit system. And that is not happening in Russia, and I don't call this Keynesianism. So
That's what he meant. Benefit
you
for
can
those.
say sorry, I will finish. You can say that even the growth of the increasing of the U.S. military budget could be called Keynesian politics in this way, because there are some groups of population that gain from its growth. And I think there are also a political problem with definition, because Ishchenko somehow is trying to confront the Ukraine, which is neoliberal, with the help of the IMF and so on, and Russia, which is moving to some kind of progressive direction with this Keynesianism. So I think that is very wrong point from empirical point of view and from political point of view, because it exactly providing the arguments for